and welcome to or back to my channel. I'm Kit, your friendly feminist cat lady spinster, and today we're going to talk about Classically Abby. Last week, Classically Abby posted a video titled, "Ladies, sex before marriage is ruining your life. Cheap sex is not female empowerment." And the caption says, "Stop having premarital sex." I find it interesting that Abby automatically equates premarital sex to cheap sex. So apparently sex that you have even in a long-term committed relationship counts as cheap sex because you're not married. Okay. So I think Abby posted this video for two reasons. One, she just finished the book Cheap Sex and she wants to talk about it. And two, for the views. I don't think it's a secret that Abby's videos in 2020 got a lot of views. Yes, she did do an ad blitz at the time, but they were also of the sort that made you go, what? And I have to admit, I do find her view counts kind of weird for someone who has 104,000 subscribers. All that to say, her controversial videos do better, and she knows it. That is enough of me. Let's get into the video.
So today, I really want to talk about how our attitude towards sex as women.
I would really like to know what our attitude towards sex is, because I'm pretty sure Abby and I actually don't share the same attitude towards sex. In fact, I would also be willing to bet that, say, my subscribers' views on sex and her subscribers' views on sex would also be very different. There is no one womanly attitude towards sex. Every woman has an individual viewpoint.
Is not better for women in the long run. It's actually much, much worse. So let's get into today's video. Let's start off by talking about how sex became cheap. So really, the first thing that made sex cheap was the advent of birth control.
So then sex has always been cheap. Or does Abby actually think birth control didn't exist until 1960?
Before birth control existed, sex and conception were inherently linked. There were ways to get around it, sure. You could absolutely have sex and not get pregnant, but there was always a risk that you would get pregnant. And with that in mind, it meant that you had to be more responsible about who you had sex with and when you had sex. Or at least you should have been, because if you weren't, then you could get pregnant, and that could have consequences that perhaps you didn't want to happen.
Like being forced to marry? Forced to have an abortion? Being sent away to visit a relative for a few months? Being considered a fallen woman and being sent to a Magdalene asylum? Abby sounds very smug here, and that really rubs me the wrong way. It sounds as though she considers these consequences a woman would have faced as normal and natural and good. If you're going to pine for the good old days, you could at least do some more research about the reality of life back then. Of course, it's also possible that she has done that and she thinks that this was all fine and the way things should be.
With the advent of birth control, physical pleasure became entirely separate from the consequence of that physical pleasure. Sex became something totally separate than having a baby, which actually was not a good thing. It meant that sex became so much more about just stimulation than it did about the connection you were having with that other person and recognizing that that person could be the father of your children. Now, when you separate sex from conception,
which people have been trying to do ever since the connection between sex and conception was realized, but yeah, sure, this is a totally new phenomenon.
The problem is that in people's minds, it's an unnatural result of sex to get pregnant.
No one thinks that pregnancy is an unnatural side effect of sex. Unwanted, yes. Undesired, yes. Unnatural, no.
Which is exactly the opposite of the truth, right? We know that sex and pregnancy are absolutely linked, but birth control gives you the perception that the worst outcome of sex, the most unnatural outcome of sex, is pregnancy.
So does Abby think that before birth control became widely available and reliable, people joyously welcomed every pregnancy? It's birth control, not mind control. It does not give the perception of anything. There are many reasons to go on birth control, but in the context of this conversation, it's to avoid pregnancy, which is one, the responsible thing to do if one does not want to become pregnant. And two, birth control doesn't seek you out, you seek it out. So if someone doesn't want to be pregnant, that's because they already don't want to be pregnant. It is not birth control that's giving them the perception that they don't want to be pregnant.
And when that's the case, not only do people feel like pregnancy is now a choice.
Well, yes, pregnancy should be a choice. Every child should be wanted. Sometimes the things she says it really makes me wonder if she's not only conservative, but an authoritarian.
That choice can lead to abortions.
So abortion and birth control are both bad.
Because, if this is an unnatural result of sex, then I shouldn't have to deal with it, and I don't want to deal with the consequences.
Except abortion is dealing with the consequences, and no one gets an abortion because they think pregnancy is unnatural.
Now, I'm not somebody who believes that sex is only for the purpose of having a child. Sex is about intimacy for a couple. It makes a couple come together closer.
That is what sex is about for you. Why do conservatives always seem to have this inability to understand that not everyone thinks the way they do?
And express their emotional feelings for each other in a physical way. It's a beautiful way to express our love for one another and come closer together as couples. But there's also always an understanding that it can lead to pregnancy. Even birth control is never 100% effective. And because of that, it should never be treated lightly, even though in 99% of cases or 96% of cases for most birth controls, you won't get pregnant.
Wait a minute. Does Abby think that if sex is kept as a marital bonding activity, no one will use birth control or get an abortion?
The next part of the puzzle is the rise of the pure relationship over the traditional relationship. Anthony Giddens, who is another sociologist that Mark Regnerus references quite a bit in Cheap Sex, came up with this theory of the pure relationship. So Giddens' argument about the pure relationship is that nowadays we have an understanding of relationships that's pretty self-absorbed and me based. Essentially, what Anthony Giddens argues is that the pure relationship exists only to meet the partner's needs, and as soon as those needs are met, the relationship can end.
Okay, so you're in a relationship, you get your needs met, and then because your needs are met, you end the relationship. But then wouldn't that mean your needs then become unmet?
Couples are together because of love or because of sexual fulfillment, but they're not together because of tradition or duty.
I find this very suspicious.
And because relationships are really seen as a way for you to find yourself, they're very short-lived. The phrase pure relationship sounds positive. It sounds like it's pure. It's not based on anything else. But marriages and relationships are based on commitments. They're based on traditions and duties to one another and to your children. And it's not just about what am I getting today? Am I happy today? Do I feel fulfilled today by you?
I thought we already understood that it's not good to get personal fulfillment from someone else.
Sometimes relationships are about putting in hard work and recognizing that you need to fight for what you built together and for the family that you have. And traditional relationships do that. Traditional relationships recognize that there's a lot more to a relationship than just, I loved you yesterday, but I don't love you today, so now it's over.
You know, I would be willing to bet that most adults don't actually behave that way in relationships.
As relationships became more pure and less traditional, we see a decline in marriage. We see a rise in divorce.
I would be willing to bet that Abby considers the traditional relationship that she speaks of to have been the norm back in the 1950s and 60s. So what is her explanation then for the divorce rate jumping from 2.2 to 5.2 from 1960 to 1980? Even though divorces became easier to get, would not the traditional relationship model have kept them together? And if the pure relationship is becoming more common than traditional, why has the divorce rate been going down? Is it possible that people see marriage as an addition to their life and not a necessity? Which means people are getting married who actually want to be married.
And we see sex treated as another path to fulfillment as opposed to something that is engaged in for the intimacy of a couple within a traditional relationship. So with those two things in mind, that leads us to number 3. Getting married has become less and less easy to do. Men can have access to sex with absolutely no problem.
I think a lot of men would object to that statement.
Men don't have to wait to have sex with someone because women don't feel like the sex that they are having needs to be with someone who will support them, raise children with them, or marry them. So sex is economically cheap. Men are able to have sex incredibly easily or access pornography on the internet, and they don't need to wait to have sex. And in doing so, better themselves, have a good career in place so they can support a family.
So men have no internal drive, hopes, dreams, goals. Everything they do is spurred on by the desire to have sex, and if sex is too easy to get, they won't do anything.
Men are really let off the hook, and women are the ones who are paying the price. Women want to be married. This isn't a question of whether or not women want to be married. Women want to be married.
Per a 2012 Pew Research study, 84% of women and 83% of men say having a successful marriage is very important to their lives. Maybe men want to get married too, Abby. Maybe it's not something women have to trick them into by withholding sex.
And when we have economically cheapened sex so that it's just available at any time to anyone, it makes it so that it is a lot harder to get married, because now it's not just, oh, men are going to get married to have sex and have a family. Men now have to come to a conclusion that the relationship they are in is pure enough for it to lead to marriage.
So men now have to decide if they want to get married based on how they feel about their partner and if they want to build a life with said partner, rather than just basing it on the sex that they would get only after marriage.
Now, the really sad thing is number 4.
Actually, the really sad thing is Abby's whole video, but we still have a bit to go, so.
The women who want to wait till marriage are now in a competition with the women who don't.
So does Abby think there's no more religious people that are waiting for marriage?
And when I say women who don't want to wait until marriage, I really think we're talking about an empowerment lie that women have bought into from a feminist narrative.
Translation. Women actually want to wait until marriage to have sex, but feminists have tricked them into thinking they'll be empowered if they have sex before marriage, and women are too stupid to realize they're not being empowered by doing something they don't want to do.
That says that they will enjoy their lives more if they have sex outside of marriage.
I guess I was absent that day at my feminist indoctrination camp. But in all seriousness, Abby, no one says that sex itself is empowering. It is empowering to have sex when you want it with someone you want it with. It is not empowering to have sex when you don't want to have sex, or to have it with someone that you don't want to have sex with. This is not that complicated to understand. And feminism's thing is that whether a woman does or does not want sex, she should not be shamed for it or punished for it either way.
But the fact of the matter is, women do not find sexual satisfaction having sex outside of marriage.
I'm going to need a source for this one, and personal opinion does not count.
Even though that's what they're told that they will do, and they will have a better sex life outside of marriage. Women don't enjoy sex in the same way when they're not married because it's unstable and they don't know that it's going to last.
Well, congratulations on finding a really old stereotype and dragging that up. So women don't enjoy sex outside of marriage because it's unstable and they don't know if it will last. But Abby also said the divorce rate is going up, which implies that marriage is also unstable and one does not know how long their marriage will last. What is life?
And even though it can be sexually fun, pleasurable for a short time,
Oh, Abby.
it's not sexually satisfactory in the long run. So what ends up happening is you have women who want to wait being put in a position of having to consider their options. Can they wait? Will they be able to find a guy who's willing to wait for them?
I'm just going to jump in here and say that if you want to wait until marriage, that's totally fine. And if a man disagrees with that, he's not the man for you. Don't throw away your standards in the hopes that he'll marry you. You won't feel good about it, and it won't work. And I'm also really confused about what Abby is saying here. I would think that she'd be all about the don't throw away your standards, but actually, is she trying to pit women against each other? Like, you want to wait until marriage, but these other women who aren't waiting for marriage are making it more difficult for you to wait for marriage because all the men that want to have sex that would have dated you are just going to them instead for the sex. And that is why you are still single. Oh, that is not cool, Abby.
Because now that sex is so cheap, he can go anywhere. He doesn't have to wait for you.
Apparently, Abby is in agreement with the manosphere men that say women are interchangeable. It does not matter your personality, your hobbies, your values. A woman is a woman, and a man does not care who he ends up with. So long as there's sex, of course.
And now all of these people who complain that there's too much emphasis put on beauty in our society and that everyone needs to look perfect. Well, it makes sense. This is why, number 5, because sex is now mostly about physical pleasure. It's not about emotional intimacy between a couple. It's cheap, it's easy to access. And when sex is about physical pleasure and not about emotional intimacy, then of course it's going to be based off looks more than anything else.
I don't know who needs to hear this, but just because someone is attractive doesn't mean they'll be good in bed.
When sex is first and foremost about physical pleasure for men and women, more than a long-lasting relationship that lasts for both sides, then sexual attractiveness becomes the most important thing, not the relationship that spurs a beautiful sex life.
So according to Abby, people don't approach other people because they like the looks of them. Even though I'm pretty sure that in the real world, that's how it works. They might not be conventionally attractive, but they are attractive in some way to you, and that is what inspires you to go and say hi.
And I want to touch on this point, which is number 6. Because marriage is now so much harder to attain.
Is it harder to attain? Or are people just marrying later? And also, I have to admit, if someone wanted to date me with the focus of getting married, that would freak me out a little bit because The way she talks, it sounds like the person you're marrying does not matter. It's just all about being married.
Because marriage is not treated as something that people need. It's treated as something that people can do if they want. It's not considered the building block of a family or the building block of a relationship. Women are getting married older. It's harder and harder to meet somebody, and it's harder and harder to get married. So as women are waiting longer and longer to get married.
So women typically get married at 28 and men at 30. I wouldn't call that waiting longer and longer. And maybe if you have to exaggerate your point, it's not a good point. There's also the consideration of why women are marrying at 28 instead of at 20 or 22 or 25. And I wonder if Abby even thinks that maybe these women didn't want to marry until then. Also, most couples these days, as I understand it, fund their own weddings, so they have to wait and save up to afford the wedding they want. Not to mention there's other goals that they might want to attain first, like buying a house. But no, it's just easier to say it's because sex is too cheap, so now it's hard to find a man to marry because sex is everywhere and that is all men care about.
They're also waiting longer and longer to have children. And fertility now becomes an issue because women are getting married older and older.
Interestingly, education plays a big role in when a woman has her first child. Without a college degree, 24. With, 30. Neither of which is an age that requires IVF. Nor is 28 old, by the way, but anyway. So maybe it's unfair, but whenever conservatives hand-wring about fertility, I just have this uneasy feeling that they really just want more people trapped in a poverty cycle.
Instead of thinking about fertility, women are looking for confluent love, pure relationships, this fulfillment that they think will come out of marriage, but is really based on their self-absorbed finding themselves mentality. And the men that they want to marry are able to avoid making this commitment until much later down the line as well. And then all of a sudden, they're 35 and having to use IVF to get pregnant.
I looked more in depth in this during my Make Women Great Again video last fall, which I will link up here. But that's not how fertility works, Abby. You are not suddenly infertile at 35.
Because getting pregnant as you get older is more difficult. All of this is a testament to the fact that marriage has become something an elite few people do because they want to, instead of a necessary part of starting a family.
Well, I guess I'm an elite now because I do think that you should only get married because you want to.
And as you guys know, I think marriage is incredibly important, and I think it's one of the most beautiful things that people can do. But without that building block, we are seeing women suffer in so many ways. Less physical satisfaction, having sex with men that they probably wouldn't want to have sex with but feel pressure to because if they want to enter into a real relationship, a lot of men are not willing to do so unless they have sex.
Why would you want to marry someone who has so little regard for your own well-being?
Waiting longer and longer to get married and allowing sex to be economically cheap and then struggling with fertility down the line. So the empowerment narrative that, oh, we should all be having as much sex as possible before we're married, outside of marriage, and that's really empowering.
It's only empowering if that's what someone wants. No one, you disingenuous nitwit, thinks that a woman having sex she doesn't want to have is empowered.
Who is it empowering? At the end of the day, it gives over much more power to men. Men are the ones who get to now have access to something that they didn't have access to before unless they made the commitment, unless they promised to support you and stay with you. And you know who's losing? Women.
I disagree.
So I really wanted to talk today about this. I hope it gave you something to think about. Make sure to check out Cheap Sex by Mark Regnerus.
I did not read the book, but I did find 2 reviews that go against Abby's endorsement. Mark Regnerus is at it again. Even after his infamous 2012 anti-gay parenting study was roundly and thoroughly debunked as bad, biased, agenda-driven science, if not outright pseudoscience, here he is 5 years later attempting to put forth a new, yet old, and recycled thesis about, what else? Sex. Here is the TLDR version of what amounts to his latest concern trolling in book form. 3 technological advances, the pill, along with online porn and online dating, but especially the pill, has completely transformed the dating and marriage markets by driving down the relative cost of sex for men. The cost has dropped to the point where the cartel is basically broken. At the same time, and not coincidentally, women have also become less dependent on men, further decreasing the incentive to get married. This is very, very bad because sex is a commodity, something that men basically take or buy from women in one way or another, and thus men no longer have any real incentive to get married nowadays. In other words, as the saying goes, why buy the cow when the milk is for free? Which literally compares women to livestock, by the way, but I digress. Marriage rates are in free fall, among young people that is, and this is a disaster for society because reasons. Same goes for birth rates as well. After all, we need more serfs to make the oligarchs even richer and more cannon fodder for their imperialistic resource wars, right? Boys will be boys unless girls and women need to be the gatekeepers, because science, or something. Thus, women are to blame for being too cheap and easy when it comes to sex, and no woman is an island in that regard. And of course, the biggest losers in this brave new world of cheap and easy sex are women and children. Men too, but mostly women and children, because they are dependent on men, so it's bad when they become less dependent on men because tradition. Of course, he says these things with much more euphemisms and verbiage and cherry-picked data to back up his specious thesis, but that is basically it in a nutshell. Note that he doesn't seem to offer any cogent solutions to the supposed parade of horrors, probably because deep down he knows exactly where that would lead and it isn't anywhere good. We saw what happened in the Victorian era, after all. An entire social movement was spearheaded to make sex as costly as possible for both men and women in spite of there being a surplus of women. The result? Prostitution and human trafficking, including of children, exploded, to the point where a whopping 1 in 20 women was involved in prostitution at any given time back then, versus less than 1 in 300 today. Talk about backfiring. And the notoriously lecherous ancient Romans had quite a relative scarcity of women, albeit with an artificial abundance due to slavery of various forms. Need I say more? Even a return to the supposedly kinder, gentler patriarchy of the 1950s would not be any better, as it really was no golden age once you peel back the saccharine, celluloid veneer of Leave It to Beaver and shows like that to reveal what it was really like. All of the widespread alcoholism, adultery, domestic violence, child abuse, rape, unsafe and illegal abortions, racism, and stuff like that kind of puts the lie to that specious claim. True, the so-called sexual revolution of the 1960s and 1970s may have been a mixed bag, as it were, but on balance, we are ultimately all better off for it along with the feminist movement. Honestly, one thing is for certain. The whole commodity model of sexuality is indeed dying, and that is a good thing. Such an outdated, toxic, and sexist paradigm is downright dehumanizing to both primary genders, and we would all be better off without it. Sex is a mutual act, and it is time we started treating it as such. And marriage for economic reasons rather than love is becoming increasingly obsolete, as it should in an increasingly egalitarian society. And while marriage can indeed be repurposed for a post-patriarchal society, the idea everybody must get married as the sine qua non of real adulthood is outmoded and no longer holds water. What a doofus. Regnerus seems to be implying that women are somehow to blame for the vast hordes of men spanking it to online pornography and as a result, losing their interest in lasting monogamous relationships with real partners. Oh, and that's mostly liberal women who are also orgasm addicts because they are less likely to belong to an organized Judeo-Christian religious sect, less likely to view sexuality as a sin, and therefore more likely to engage in sex for their own enjoyment, or, to paraphrase the book, to use sex as a way to add some kind of transcendent meaning and pleasure to their sad, empty, liberal lives. Good grief. The original research used for this book is utter crap. The conclusions are totally specious as well, not unlike Regnerus's debunked conclusions regarding same-sex parenting in one of his earlier studies. He seems to approach his research by choosing a thesis that reflects his current religious beliefs and then cherry-picking data to prop up his questionable conclusions. Science is dispassionate. It relies on researchers who are willing to test theses and abandon them when they are proven wrong, or to at least study them more closely, or to use the kind of participants whose data can be applied to a wider population. Oh, and by the way, I find the conclusion that liberal women who refer to their sexual health as an indicator of sexual promiscuity and therefore emotional vapidity, as the author implies, to be absolutely laughable. Having been in the women's healthcare profession for almost 20 years, I am nothing but encouraged when I hear women speak of their sexual and reproductive health, because so many American women in this country are completely and totally ignorant of it. Young men and young women should be made aware of their complete anatomy, of how it works, and of what is normal versus what is not normal when it comes to warning signs for health. Implying that knowledge and value for her own sexual health implies cheapness is a disgustingly low blow and inaccurate as well. I have to say, I really didn't like the way Abby portrayed men or women in her video. You know, the lazy, slovenly men just out there scamming for cheap sex, with no incentive to improve themselves or go anywhere in life because sex is just too cheap and easy to come by, and that is all men care about. And then those dear little dim-witted women having sex they don't want because they've been told it's empowering and they're too stupid to realize that they're not empowered because men are getting it too cheap and easy, and they're really just like shooting themselves in the foot by making sex too easy to get and thereby... And... I think I have a headache. But yeah, either way, we're all doomed because of loose women. And does she really think her husband only married her because she wouldn't have sex with him until marriage? Does she really think that's a good and healthy way to build a family? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my disjointed thoughts. I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. I hope you enjoyed it. My socials and sources are linked below. Have a great day, and I will see you next week. Bye. I'm also trying to figure out other ways to film, so if the cats are hanging around, you can see them, but apparently it's either me or the cats. You can see one, but not the other.